How to pick the right book. There are a lot more people who want to read than who actually read. And trust me, I've been in that boat too, where I just basically buy a lot of books and I just don't make the time to actually finish them. But that's before I broke it down into different categories on how to pick the right book. Before I get into the how, I'm going to get into the why. So why is it important to pick the right book? Well, I think it's because you're going to be spending a lot of time with this book. It's not a very quick thing to read. Yeah, there are speed readers, but I think for the majority of people, we're average or maybe even slow at reading. And that's okay. First of all, totally fine to be a slow reader. I may come out with a video in the future that kind of goes over some tips on how to read faster, but for now, let's assume that you're a average or a slow reader. So you're going to be spending a lot of hours with this physical thing, with this book. And so we're going to talk about what you need to look for when picking the right book. The first thing to do is to consider the weight. You want to hold the book in your hand and you want to feel it. You want to feel how heavy it is or how light it is and see if this is something that you could picture holding wherever you're going to read. Maybe you read before you go to bed. Maybe you read just at home sitting on a chair or on the beach or while you're commuting to work, whatever it is. You want to make sure this is something that you can imagine yourself holding for many hours, because I think for the majority of us, that's how long it's going to take to read any book. So consider the weight. You also want to consider whether or not you want to read something that's a hardcover or a soft cover book. These are two completely different styles of printing, and it does make a difference in your hands. So, for instance, I don't really like to read hardcover books when it's a small text. Like, I don't know, when I was a kid, I read A Series of Unfortunate Events, and I feel like those were always hardcover. That was fine, I was a kid, but looking back on it and picking them up now, I'd rather have a soft cover version because they're kind of small. But something like Stephen King's It, this is something that, you know, I want to be hardcover. I don't want this to be a soft cover because it's so large. The hardcover will support all the pages, and I think that that makes more sense. It'll lay flat when I put it on a desk or a table, and even in my hands. Same thing goes for this giant book. This is Shakespeare's Complete Works. I don't think you would want to read this if it was soft cover. Well, I don't know if you'd want to read it at all, but especially if it was soft cover, I don't think you'd be able to get through it. With it being hardcover, I know that I can just lay it down, I can open it, and it's going to stay shut. It's not going to close back up. So hardcover or soft cover, that's important to consider. This next one's a little weird, but you actually want to smell the book. I know there's probably some people out there who don't think that's weird, but I'm assuming the majority of people probably do think that's a strange thing. But I'm telling you, it's important. Just today in my classroom, I picked up a book on the shelf and it just smelled awful. I don't know. It's hard to explain if you've never actually smelled a book before. And older books, you know, they have an old smell. It kind of smells like an antique shop or something like that. I kind of like that. Some people don't. And if you don't like that, then that's good to know. That means you don't really want to buy something that's really old and been used. You don't really want to just buy any book without checking it out. What if the person was a smoker and this book just absolutely stinks? It absorbs the smells around it, so you just got to keep that in mind. And also, some people don't like the smell of newly printed books. I kind of do. It depends on, again, the ink and the type of paper, but I would definitely say smell is an important part to picking a book. Another one is paper thickness, and this isn't one you may have considered before, but I recently ordered a book and the paper was so thin that you could see through it. So I'm reading the text and I can see the reverse text on the other side of the page through the paper. And it was really distracting, and I couldn't get past the first page because honestly, that was going to bother me the entire time. And so I had to return that. And that's another thing. You have to be very careful with those print-on-demand services. That's what a lot of publishers are doing now to save money, because basically what they'll do is they upload a PDF file and they send it to somebody, a company, and that company will basically print a new copy every time someone orders it. And this helps the writer or the publisher with costs. They don't have to pay a certain amount to actually purchase the books, store them, and ship them themselves. They can just kind of give it to somebody else to do all the hard work. But that comes at a cost, because a lot of times those print-on-demand services are very cheap. And what I'm finding is that the paper's thin and the ink is printing blurry sometimes. It's like you're reading a book and not only can you see through the page, but it's like you have double vision because the font is all blurred in certain spots. And sometimes I saw this once or twice, parts of the page will just totally be blank, like there was a printing error. That's why it's especially important that you investigate, check these books out, make sure that you are committed to holding this book for hours, because that's really what it is. And speaking of fonts, I think fonts are important too. I had a book in college that I was supposed to read for a class, and I couldn't even finish the first chapter because the font style was so obnoxious. It was almost like it was printed in a way that it made it look like you were reading it from a computer screen. It was a very robotic looking text, and not courier, like the screenwriting text. That's fine to me, but it's hard to explain. It was a very techie kind of font, and I don't know, I just didn't like it. But that's my preference. So now I know if I'm looking on the shelf and I open up a book that looks interesting to me, if I see that kind of font, I know I'm not going to read that book. I'm not. So what I'll do is try to find a different version that has maybe a different kind of font, or just wait until they publish a new edition with hopefully a different kind of font. Also, too, font size. Some people like to read very large font sizes. Some people prefer small. You have to pick one that is going to be easy on your eyes. If you're squinting and having trouble reading the first page of a book, and you notice that the font size is small, that's probably why. And you'll start to get a headache. Your eyes will start to feel like they're being strained, because that's what you're doing. You're straining them to read. So what I'd say is definitely open up the book, look at the font size, try reading a little bit, and see if it's something that, again, you can handle for hours and hours and hours. Finally, what you want to do is read the first page. And read it in full if it's really a book that you want to get. There are some people who think that you need to put in a little more time before you know. I've talked to people who say that you really need to get to like 100 pages before you know whether or not you're going to like the book. I say a similar thing, but more so about knowing when to stop reading a book. I'll stop reading a book after 100 pages now if I don't like it. Sometimes the first page will draw me in, but if I'm 100 pages in and I still don't like the book, then I'm not going to finish it. Because in the past, I've actually finished a whole book that I really hated by the end, and I swore I'd never do that again. So now I kind of cut it at 100 pages. But that's a different video, that's a different topic. What we're talking about is how to pick the right book, and if you're in the store, you're not going to be reading 100 pages. You only have time for probably 1 or 2 or a few pages. But I'd say read the first page, see if it pulls you into the story or into the topic, whatever it is. And that is a good way to know whether or not this is a book that you can spend a lot of time with. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, then consider checking out my other ones I've done. I have a whole series on Lord of the Flies and writing advice from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And until next time, read on.